you guys should do a video dedicated to whether or not the three-eyed crow and Bloodraven are the same person. I'm inclined to say that they aren't the same, but I've heard good arguments on both sides, so I'm curious where you guys come down on it. And of course, I do think perhaps us doing at some point like a really like well-dedicated video on it is a good idea, but just for Raven's Nest today, diving into your guys' Ravens, Jimmy, what are your thoughts on it?
I honestly think that they're the same. I know that that's not as fun, but I don't necessarily think that they're two different people. I've always had that kind of hunch that this is one of those things that maybe Wins has been coming for a long time. And I think maybe, with Dance with Dragons and all the brand stuff, that this is one of the things that we want to latch on to. But I just look at like the mystery surrounding all these things, and I'm like, what would that add to the story? Right. Like, I guess I can't see a reasonable place for that to go in future books, considering that I think we need to start wrapping up some of this stuff in Wins and then get ready for Dream of Spring to, if George is really going to do it in 7 books. So my gut reaction is that they're the same. What about you?
I'm in the opposite camp. I think that the three-eyed crow, that regardless of what happens in the books, will be very different from what happens in the show. But I think the three-eyed crow is sort of this entity that has been around for a very long time, might even be perhaps tied to, the Great Other or something. It just seems odd to me that they're all of a sudden Brendan Rivers happens to go beyond the wall, and now he has become this, stuck in this tree, and there's children of the forest there. There's green seers and wargs and other things beyond the wall with the wildlings, and none of them over the centuries and thousands of years have ever come in contact with children of the forest that felt like they could use them to some, their benefit. So I feel like it is something that the children of the forest, like Leaf and everybody knows about, that they're able to sort of tap into this power, and that Brendan Rivers is just filling that role in the current time, because we do know that the role passes. So we already know that both in the show and very likely in the books, the role of the three-eyed raven in the show and three-eyed crow does at least pass from Bloodraven to Bran.
Yes. And I agree with you here. I agree with that 100%. Like, I think the three-eyed crow is a thing, right? That has existed and will exist. And like, we're always curious about who came before Bloodraven. Right. So I agree with you there. It's just that some people think that
evil
like,
or something.
Yeah, they're like two separate entities working separately. And I don't see that, because a lot of the descriptions that we get actually from about Bloodraven are Brendan Rivers, and the three-eyed crow are very similar. I remember both being described with the one red eye, for example. So I never felt like the descriptions led me to believe anything other than maybe like a couple words that people would point out, which, to be fair, George does do things with just singular words and plays with us a little bit. But I do agree with that. I agree with what you're saying, that I think the three-eyed crow is an entity that has existed a long time, and Brendan Rivers, Bloodraven, is just another addition of that.
Right. Yeah, he's one of them. Yeah, so I think that we will begin to see, we don't, obviously with the show, we didn't really get you don't get POVs. So I do think that the three-eyed crow is maybe begin to take Bran over a little bit. I think that'd be kind of interesting to see that. And so, because we'll get POVs, like, hey, it's not just me, there's another person here, whether it has become some sort of dark, ultimate evil, whatever, I don't know. But I do think that when we get Bran POVs, when he become the three-eyed crow taking the mantle from Bloodraven, I feel like it might feel like there's two people.
I agree. I would definitely agree with that. Like, their lineage becomes his lineage, and it all kind of, the timeline kind of warps together, which is why we know that Bran is going to interact with the timeline at some point. So if in the past Bran was already the three-eyed crow, you know what I mean? Like, they're all kind of one. I don't know. It's kind of trippy.
Okay, so we have another one here from her as well, and it kind of goes into the same subject. So she says, I'm probably in the minority on this, but Jojen has actually changed my interpretation of what's going on in Bloodraven's cave. I know Jojen says Bran is a green seer, but based on the known criteria, it seems more likely that Jojen is the green seer, which has me thinking it's Jojen the Children of the Forest and Bloodraven need, and Bran was merely the lure to get them to their cave. If the Jojen Pace theory pans out, I'll be even more convinced of that. That gives me Patchface under the sea, old fish eat the young fish vibes, but I digress. Something in my buttermilk ain't clean there, and I think that plot is far more malevolent than it appears.
Okay, so I like this quite a bit. I think this is interesting, and I do think we should think about Jojen's role in the cave and in Bran's journey and how it all ties in to the Children of the Forest, to the Green Seers, and obviously to Bloodraven and the Three-Eyed Crow. I don't think that Jojen was the end game, but I do think that he is a necessary piece of the puzzle. I think Jojen Pace is 100% real. I think
Same.
that definitely happens. I think it's extremely sad as well. Uh, Maybe Jojen like sacrifice had to have happened for this transfer to begin, possibly. I think a lot of people say Jojen's a green seer, but I think he more so just has green dreams. And maybe there's more of a distinction there than we realize. But I don't think that Bran and Jojen both can't be green seers. I think they both can be. But as Meek Mill would say, there is levels to this shit.
Yeah. I'm with you. And I think maybe like, they need the Jojen Pace to sort of give Bloodraven some more power, or, they lure green seers there in order to do it. And maybe that was the case when Bloodraven got there the first time. Maybe the whole deal is that Bran doesn't necessarily need to be a green seer, because Bran's dreams, really, if you kind of look at them, they're all kind of actually influenced by the Three-Eyed Crow.
Yeah.
So they may not necessarily be green dreams. They could be Three-Eyed Crow dreams that Bran is having. But what might end up being the whole deal is that Bran, we know, is a warg and has blood of the first men in him.
Yes.
So that might be the thing that makes him like the super version,
yes,
of this. And it's not to say you're right. And it's not just, and it's also not just that. He could also have King's blood in him, which we know Bloodraven does, because he comes from the Stark line, and Robb becomes a king. So in theory, the Starks are kings, and we do know that the Starks have been kings. So there's a lot of like potential blood magic things that exists with Bran. And if Bran ends up becoming king, then his blood is King's blood his entire life.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Maybe it's one of these trippy things where it's like, well, we can pick you because you have King's blood, and he's like, but there are no kings. Like, but you will be king, and then the timeline jumps and whatnot. We're going a little into the weeds here, but I agree. I think him being a warg and also being a Stark probably does level him up a little bit over Jojen, even though Jojen is a man of, the old gods and the first men and all these other things. Like, the Reeds have been around a long time. The warging feels very, very important. And do you feel like Bloodraven is a warg?
I don't know.
Like, can he possess that little crow in the dreams? Like, if you can get into a crow in a dream, then are you a
warg? He only maybe he can do that because when you become the Three-Eyed Crow, you sort of gain new abilities. And it's only through, because you're like tied to the weirwood tree, that you now gain abilities that you didn't have before.
That weirwood Wi-Fi, man.
Exactly. Because he was a sorcerer beforehand. So, but we don't know that like Melisandre could warg. We haven't seen any other. That's kind of the crazy thing, is when you begin to look at magic and begin to look at things, there's a lot of things that are able to be done by multiple different gods, right? Or sometimes are perceived to have been done by multiple different gods, right? Azor Ahai, or excuse me, R'hllor can bring people back from the dead. We know that the others and the Night King doesn't exist in the books, but what we know that the White Walkers are able to raise wargs. So they are giving them some sort of life, bringing them back from the dead, animating them in some way, whether it's just sort of their weird version of necromancy or whatever.
Mhm.
It is still some kind of magic that is now giving these people a different life. The drowned god is able to bring people back, whether it's actually the drowned god doing it or it's just
Mouth
basic
to mouth.
CPR, right? At least that's how they view it. So there's ways to change shapes and face, whether it's
Mhm.
like with Melisandre clamoring people or with Arya and the Faceless Men. So there's a lot of shared abilities, but done different ways by different gods.
Yeah, and I think that if I had to put my money on it, and also based the way we've heard George Martin talk about gods and religion in A Song of Ice and Fire, I think in one interview he famously said that he doesn't think any of the religions are real in Westeros, and I think that maybe it is one god with many faces. You know what I'm saying? Like a different interpretation of the god in different areas, and that could be the very case in our world as well. Or maybe it's not a god at all. Maybe it's something we just simply do not understand. Therefore, maybe that makes it a god. Now we're getting into philosophy. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but it's clear that there is some magic or force going on in Plantos and Westeros and everywhere in the world. And we know King's blood seems to possibly be important. At least that's what we think. We also know that wargs seem to be very important, and also just in general, blood magic seems to be very important.